22nd, 1960. 1960. That's the day that I was born. And can you imagine what that must have been like? And if you're interested in this at all, I'll tell you, because everybody says, what happened? People in this room would know this more than most people I would talk to going to a school, for example. They have no idea of history about this word. The word is thalidomide.
Yes.
Thalidomide. The morning sickness medication that was given to pregnant women, right? In the late 50s and early 1960s.
I'm a pediatrician, so lots.
Yeah, terrible thing, wasn't it? Was it? Was it a terrible thing? I'm not sure about that, but I will tell you it had a profound impact, obviously, on the entire course of my life. I didn't always feel this good about it. You can well imagine I had some challenging times in my life, especially adolescence. I don't know if you want to do a little recall exercise. I know some of you aren't spring chickens, but can you remember your adolescence? Where you were, what your family unit was, what you had as responsibilities in your life. Did you have a positive outlook on your existence? And I'm saying that, and I think about it in my head, I'm almost giggling in my head. We didn't talk about this stuff 50, 60 years ago, did we? All of the material that I have been introduced to in my life as a motivational speaker has obviously changed over time. But little did I know, I landed in the most perfect spot ever to make me the person that I am today. And I didn't even know that at the time, because I was a teenager, and I didn't like being like this, right? It was so immature, so silly. Little things like, for example, I didn't have a girlfriend. I didn't date. Because what do when we start dating somebody, typically? We hold hands. So I didn't have a lot of luck with that because these are my hands. And I felt sorry for myself, right? I remember really trying to figure out, even in the 70s when I was a teenager, why me? And why me? Why did I have to be given this life? That's not fair. That was a good one, wasn't it? That was kind of recreated during the COVID era. Yeah? How many of you use that expression? That's not fair. Right. Funny thing is, those were the building blocks of the person that I became today. Going through tough stuff, going through challenge, of course, all the cliches. But it took me a long time to come to grips with what this was really all about. Not until August 23rd, 1985, at 10:53 in the morning, did I fully grasp my life. Now this is a bit of a cheap one, okay? That was the moment my son Vance was born. So yes, I'm also a dad. Don't try to figure out how that happened, just go with it, okay? Obviously I found someone to hold this. And the other fun parts. Oh, don't be offended, it's about the fun parts. Come on, we all love the fun parts. I couldn't believe that I was going to be a father, and I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I'm in the operating room in Regina, Saskatchewan, of course, watching this whole thing take place, and I had this bizarre flashback to 1973. Junior high. They brought in a health nurse to talk to our junior high class about babies. Do you remember that at all in your life? Do you remember that at all? Do you have a little recall? She even dressed in her uniform. She got up in front of all of us. I'm sorry, this is going to sound like I'm making fun of her voice, but I'm not. But I remember her saying, this honestly came into my head. Two things. Childbirth is the most beautiful shared human experience. Okay, that was a big lie. There was no sharing going on, right, ladies? The guys are in there doing what? Especially the modern guys. What? Breathe, breathe, breathe. That's not helping. That's just patronizing. When babies are born, they're beautiful. No, they're not. They're covered in goo, right? It's sort of disgusting. Again, I apologize if this offends you. They're holding my child up by his heels. He's dripping on the floor, and I'm even looking at the floor, not him. I don't know what was going on. I was transformed into this moment, and I lost it. I wasn't in my head. I heard this voice, Mr. Law, Mr. Law. Where's it coming from? Mr. Law. And all of a sudden I woke up. The nurse is saying, Mr. Law, this is typically where the fathers cut the umbilical cord. And I said, they don't really let me play with scissors. So the nurse cut the cord, tied the knot. That's a skill, huh? They got rid of the goo, put him in a blanket, got me a chair. I sat down, looked up at the clock. He was 11 minutes old, and they put him here. He fit here. He doesn't fit here anymore. I have a 38-year-old son. Can you relate to this, folks? Looking at your own families, if you're so blessed. Where did they get to be so old? What happened, huh? How did that life go by so quickly? And he's fine, by the way. Oh, he does get this question. I love this. How does it feel having a dad without arms? I love his answer. It's not like I got to pick. Let's explore that for a minute. I don't know if this is of interest to you, but I'm intrigued by this. How do we land in our lives? Do you ever think about this? Maybe it's just me. How do we get where we are? I think this next one might be a little bit out there in imagination zone. I'm trying to understand why I would talk about this. I have a rhetorical question for you. So in other words, don't answer. You can try, but I made this one up, so you won't get the right answer. What are the two most powerful words in human language? And I'm talking almost 8 billion people on planet Earth in their language. Two most powerful words put together. I got all these answers. Thank you, love you, go Riders. From Saskatchewan. I'm pregnant. Think about it. I'm pregnant. Those two words are so personal. And my wife, who cannot have children, by the way, would remind me to tell you, even for a woman who can't say I'm pregnant, that is one of the most profoundly important humanities we own. It changes everything, doesn't it? Having a child, having more than one. It never occurred to me to even think about this. Obviously, I thought about it when my ex said I'm pregnant, which was not planned. Bummer. But that moment, I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking about what it all means, holding this brand new child. And something occurred to me. I had never once ever considered how my own mom and dad must have felt the first time they held me. I was born without arms. I wonder how that day went. And then it occurred to me. My mom was 55 years old the first time she held me, and my dad was 53, and I was homeless. I'm not messing with you. We didn't have homeless people in Yorkton, Saskatchewan, where I was born, so that's not what we were. I was not an orphan. My parents didn't die, but my parents chose to give me up. When I tell that part of my story, I always find it interesting because the audience goes, "Aw, that's so sad." No, it wasn't sad. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. My birth family, nothing wrong with them, but they were not prepared to raise a child without arms in 1960. We didn't know what we know now, obviously, right? And no disrespect. But when I hear people say, "Oh, I miss the good old days," which ones are we talking about now? Because they were good in some respects. They were also bad in so many other respects. I won't go into the depth of that discussion. But the reality is mom and dad were 55 and 53 because they were foster parents. In Little Yorkton, Saskatchewan, population 10,000 people, not a lot of options for an armless child to go live somewhere, so they took me in. Talk about the essence of service before self. And they were not members of Rotary, all right? Jack was a machinery mechanic and a service manager for International Harvester Trucks and Tractors in Yorkton. And Hilda, well, what did we used to call these ladies? Kind of a little bit offensive, but I didn't see it that way. She was a housewife. And that's what she did. She raised my two brothers. My brother John is 91 years old now. My brother Terry is 87 years old. They were married in 1930. They went through the Depression. Jack fought in World War II, came home with medals across his chest and memories that he never talked about. They were the essence of, well, I don't know, is it Canadian or is it just humanity? But they were the essence of people that cared more about somebody else than they did about themselves. Think about it. They were ready to shut her down. They had a house with 3 empty bedrooms, and Hilda Law saw that as being wrong somehow. Now, I'll tell you, confess this, they were kind of religious, not extremist religious, but they definitely were people of faith. Hilda believed this was her mission, spoken from God himself, saying, take this little boy home. Can you imagine? I want you to picture this for just a moment. If you can, what would that have been like if that would have been you? If you were Hilda Law, what would you have done? See, the reason that I know my life turned out better this way than the other way is in 1993 I did get to meet my birth family. It took a long time to get there, to that point. A lot of it was history. We didn't have the same history we have now, where you were adopted back in those days. You weren't allowed to track down your birth family. People say, well, that's your real family. I disagree. I hate the idea of arguing terminology, but they were not my real family. My real family were Jack and Hilda Law. My brother John and his wife Kathleen and their 3 kids. My brother Terry and his wife Janet and their 8 kids. That was my circle of influence. Yorkton, Saskatchewan, being in a family that cared so much. They were volunteers for everything. I calculated it one time when my mom was still alive. We were having a little fun with this. Mom and I decided that I'd been to 65 funerals before I was 6 years old. Do you know why? Because Mom was a member of the United Church Women's Group, and they would do the funeral meals or luncheons or whatever they were doing, and I would come along. Even as a little boy, 3, 4 years old, I would wander around and make people smile when they were crying. I guess I was always meant to be a speaker or some kind of entertainer or some kind of inspiration, because I didn't wander around as a little boy wondering what happened to me, because there was nothing wrong with me, because that was the attitude of Hilda and Jack Law's culture in their home. They didn't hide me. If you go into the history of thalidomide in Canada, which I'm the only one that I'm familiar with, because I'm very much a member of the founding organization of the Thalidomide Victims Association of Canada, I got very lucky. So many of the babies, 125 in Canada that we know about, did not have the kind of life story that I'm giving you today. They didn't have the kind of influence of parents like mine. They were probably put in corners, not allowed to go to school, never saw the face of the public because they were too embarrassed to show off these children. So you see how lucky I was. But why I'm telling you about this is just kind of a reminder story. I hope you're not offended by this. How many of you got to like 55 or 60 years old and went, I'm done? Really? Wrong answer. Hilda and Jack Law brought in a brand new baby when they were that age, and look what they produced. It was incredible. But they had no idea what they were doing, did they? Really think about it. Again, no big deal about this if you've seen me before, but I don't know if you know I'm famous. I'm really famous in Saskatchewan, which is easy, by the way. I got famous in 1961 when the Regina Leader-Post were doing a story on thalidomide, because it was coming up news. It wasn't breaking news like today. And they wanted to tell the story, but they weren't telling a positive story. Not that they could. It was not a really positive thing, thalidomide itself. But they heard about this baby in Yorkton, so they came to Yorkton. They wanted to interview my mom. They took a picture of me. I still have this. From the front cover of the Regina Leader-Post in December of 1961, there I am, on the entire cover. Black and white, of course. I'm wearing nothing but a little tiny diaper, so you can see my armless body, and a black photographic bar across my eyes so nobody would recognize who I was. Reporter sits on the couch and he's just looking at me. And my mom goes, are you gonna ask a question or something, or are you gonna just stare? I'm sorry, Mr. Law, I'm trying to be rude, but I can't stop looking at him. You know what she said? I know, he's adorable, isn't he? Okay, here's a real tricky one. Don't be offended. There's a lot of ugly babies, unless you're the parent of one. You don't see ugly, do you? You see nothing but beauty, nothing but joy, hopefully. And my mom somehow saw that. I don't know that my mom was replacing me as a grandchild, that she had many of, by the way. I think last count, when my parents are both gone now, by the way, but last count, there was somewhere in the neighborhood now, as time has gone by, and especially my very prolific Terry and Janet in Sherwood Park, who have 8 children, I think grand total of 36 grandchildren and 4 or 5 great-grandchildren now, and the talk keeps ticking. But that's that's something fascinating, isn't it? Grandchildren. How many of you are enjoying that? What's that stupid line? I hate to repeat it because it's kind of, I didn't make it up. Remember that one? Wish I would have had the grandchildren first? Yeah, exactly. Something about the joy that somebody who loves life can bring to people around them, isn't it? That's what I got lucky with. Jack and Hilda Law were life lovers. They wanted to tell a story, but not to the public. They were embarrassed almost to tell it to the public. But Mom wanted the public to know the real story. So the reporter says, well, you see something good in this? Yeah? Well, I gotta hear this. He started to use his toes for fingers and his feet for hands. How'd you teach him that? He taught us. Mrs. Law, he's a baby. Babies teach us lots, sir. You just gotta pay attention. I walked in his room one morning. He was dangling his favorite teddy bear between his first and second toe by its left ear. So what'd you do? The reporter said, well, I got curious. I wonder what else he could do. Started kind of trying experiments. Now, here's a modern take on this. This was 1961. Mom couldn't exactly Google no arms, right? Siri, what do we do? Is there a YouTube video for this? No, of course not. They had to be creative and inventive. But more than anything, this is my favorite thing almost in the world, this little next line. They were so good at seeing the good and the bad. They could just see it. Probably because of what they've been through, yes? If you've been through stuff, and you know what I'm talking about, because life can be very, very unfair. You can either choose to let it beat you up, or you can let it be your motivation to try to do better, to see the good in the bad. Mom's favorite story. I love this. I wish I would have had one of these when I was a kid. They didn't have these cool reusable bottles, right? They didn't even have water bottles back in those days, remember? Water from the tap, that was it. But this is my favorite thing as an example of how I've adapted and how I've been able to use technology and devices like this. But pretend it's a baby bottle without a handle. Mom tried my baby bottle story. She loved this story. She tried this over an entire week. She put my baby bottle on a pillow in my crib and laid it sideways like this. Okay, can you picture it? Kind of put it down a bit of an angle, laid me next to it, put it in my mouth thinking I could, drink, gravity would feed me. It didn't work. Because all I did when I got on my side was roll over. Because having no arms, I rolled over really well. You know that game little kids play, rolling down hills? I was awesome at that game. But Mom was not a quitter. Mom was not a giver-upper. It was their DNA. So she put the bottle back in the pillow. When I rolled over, the bottle back in the pillow. When I rolled over, the bottle back in the pillow. For a week, she never quit. One morning, she came in my room. I was sitting up in the corner with the bottle between both feet, sucking away, having a great time. So you can imagine, Mom then got really fascinated. She took me out of my crib. She put me on the floor. She stuck a bunch of toys in front of me, waited to see what I would do. She said, I grabbed the toy with my toes and I started to play. Is this the toy? No, it's a hairbrush. I bought this at a Woolworth store in Edmonton in 1981 because I was starting to be a speaker for schools. And I wanted to show kids how I've learned to adapt my feet. So this is an example, because they all want to know, right? How do you wash your face? How do you brush your teeth? How do you shave? How do you shower? How do you dry off? I have staff. No, I roll around on the ground like a towel, like a dog. That's how I dry off. But my point is, I can reach up and do something like this. So am I trying to impress you? Yeah. Not so you'll go home and try this. Please don't go home and try this. But so you can maybe reevaluate the next time you face a big obstacle and maybe try not to take it too personal. Because we all have obstacles. And they're all overcomeable. My feet became my hands. And my so-called handicap disappeared. Yeah, it's a nice story, isn't it? Yeah, you bet it is. But I'm not telling you the nice story so I can look good. What a couple. Jack and Hilda Law would be my advocates, would be my champions, but they did not make my life easy. I want to be very clear on this. I know for a fact, again, God bless her, my birth mother's name was Sophie Pahalko. They lived in rural Saskatchewan outside of Melville. Her husband was Peter, my father, who died in 1982. I have a brother, Alan. I have a sister, Elaine. I would have grown up on a farm with no power, no running water, no access to support network, in a time frame when that was exactly what I needed. I ended up in a home with an elderly, quote unquote, woman who did not do everything for me like Sophie would have. One of the common stories of thalidomide babies was moms overreacting because they blamed themselves for taking medication that the doctors gave them. Obviously, I'm not trying to lecture about this, but they didn't do anything wrong. Really, the doctors didn't do anything wrong either. This was a function of the time. We didn't need to test drugs back in those days, and I'm not going to get into this debate, okay? But I was fascinated during COVID. How all of a sudden there was 1 million people that knew about pharmaceutical manufacturing. Really, none of you had any idea, unless you were in pharmaceuticals. But I digress. The reality is, drugs can be good, and they can be bad. They can be both. But the funniest part of this story to me, and I'm going to be very blunt about this, I think what I learned was through this next story. In 1966, old story, you probably heard this before, you've heard me. 1966, I'm ready to go to school. There's a school right across the street from our house in Yorkton. And I'm ready to go, because I can do everything. I had chores at home, all right? I didn't get away with nothing. I had to, do stuff in my house. Make my bed every morning before school. I still make my bed every morning. Even in hotels, I make my bed. Clean up my toys every night before bed. Vacuum the carpet with my foot 3 times a week, because mother loved neatness. Mow the lawn with my chest. Shovel snow with my chest. Take out the garbage in my teeth. That was nice. I remember the first time my mom said, go do the dishes. What? Yeah, your brothers had to do it at your turn. How am I supposed to do that? Mom always had the same answer. How am I supposed to know? You're the one without arms. You figure it out. If your kids have never said you don't love me, you're not doing the right job, okay? I'm sorry, I'm just kidding. Do you know what I mean? Our job is not to have our kids love us or like us when they're going through struggle. It's to push them, because life isn't fair. And life can be very tough. And resilience and all those buzzwords, they come not from an easy life, but from challenge. So I was ready to go to school. And it was right across the street. St. Alphonsus Elementary School, right across the street. How lucky does a guy get? Mom and Dad took me across the street to sign me up for my education. I want you to picture that. Old measurements. Dad was 6 feet 3 inches tall, 235 pounds, okay? Professional heavy-duty machinery mechanic, and ex-professional heavyweight boxer. You picturing it? Okay. Mom was 5'2", weighed about 150 pounds. Mom was solid. They made quite the couple walking down the street together, you can imagine, right? Went into the principal's office after being in the library having dainties. I remember I had a donut. I don't know why I remember that. Did you know that a Tim Hortons donut fits perfect on your big toe? You should see the look I get at Tim Hortons when I'm having a donut. It's priceless. Anyway, the reality is, we go into this principal's office, and my dad's there, and my mom's there, and I'm in the middle, and the principal just looks at us and says, he can't come here. And my dad went, we live across the street. Well, Mr. Law, we know who you are. You're kind of well known in town here, but he can't come here. My mom was working to school. Where's he supposed to go? Oh, Mrs. Law, there's a school across town for kids like him. Mom, what kids like who? Principal pointed me and went, crippled kids like him. Word of the time, right? Mom looks at me, looks at the principal, and says, he's not crippled. Principal looked at my mom like there was something wrong with her too. Mrs. Law, he's got no arms. What do you call that? Mom went, Alvin. Funny story, right? Yeah, the principal didn't laugh. He just sat there. You know what he said? Be that as it may, there's nothing I can do. All right, I'm going to be presumptuous for a second. That's not the Rotary saying, is it? There's nothing we can do. What if it was? Wouldn't that be silly to have a service organization whose motto was, there's nothing we can do? The trouble is, this is relevant because there's not enough people that are doing what you do. And your membership is shrinking. Why is that? Because we're becoming so much more about me, than about you. That's why I love talking with Rotary. We're almost done. That's why I love coming out into a small gathering, because you almost embarrass me with what you've done. Yeah, I've got a big resume and I've done all kinds of amazing things, but I've never gotten down and dirty with Rotary like you have. Spoken to some incredible gatherings. My favorite one ever, Dawson Creek, was fun, but Kampala, Uganda, that was amazing. Rotary District in Kampala for Uganda, Kenya. 2,600 Rotarians, blew my brain. I go in there thinking like you would think. First thinking. Only white guy in the room with my wife and I, just two of us. 2,600 people with black skin. You know how many women were there? 1,400. Can you believe that? There were more women there than men. That's another thing that's changing in Africa is Rotary. We are seeing the world become connected to this amazing organization. But here's my point of the story about the school. Should have been in that room. My mom started to cry. My dad saw my mom cry. My dad loved my mom. When my mom died in 1996, my parents had been married for 66 years. Can you believe that? Dad saw mom cry, then he looked at the man that made mom cry, and he said, Hilda, I think you need a moment here, dear. Why don't you go back to the library, get yourself another coffee, take the boy, get him another donut. The principal and I, we're going to have a little chat now. Now, I don't know what went on in there, but 20 minutes later, Dad comes out, big smile. Hey, kid, you're going to school here tomorrow. I was sure my dad beat up the principal. And he could have. Would have been quick. One hit, that would have been it. My point is this. My dad didn't beat up the principal. My dad challenged the principal. But not in an imposing and negative way. You know what he said exactly? Real quick. He said, I get it. I didn't want him either. This was his mother's idea. Think about it. We weren't ready to have another child, let alone that one. But he kind of grows on you, you know? He's got to give a little time. But most important, we do live across the street. And we are members of this community. And he needs to go to the community school, which is this one. You need to embrace that. And he did. Because a principal changed his mind, changed the policy, I got to go to school. This is not an education story. This is a story that might sound a bit funny. I don't believe education's a right. I believe it's a privilege. Because I've been to places around this planet that do not have schools. But there's Rotary, building a school, building a well, doing something to make a difference, teaching in Pakistan. What kind of goofball does that? The reality is, you are the best people on planet Earth. And you make a difference. And you change lives. Maybe not necessarily all of the world, but one human being at a time. Because I got to go to school, I got to experience a life that I would have never even imagined. Because I got to go to school, I got to be in band, not playing drums. My first instrument was a trombone. Picture that for just a moment. How would I play a trombone? Well, a band director in Yorkton, who also believed in service before self, mounted a trombone on the side of a wooden chair with metal rods and clamps that held the trombone, and I played with my foot like this. Last year, well, I guess it was last year now, in June of 2023, this is the kind of fun stuff I get to do. I got to speak at the Con Selmer Music Plant in Elkhart, Indiana. It's where they hand make trumpets and trombones. So I spoke to all of the skilled craftspeople who make these by hand, 350 of them. And then after my talk that day, I got a tour of the Con Selmer plant, seeing how they take a sheet metal and turn it into an instrument. From this point to that point, all in one day. 65 trombones a day, 85 trumpets a day, all made by hand. I got to the end of the line, and there was the production manager going, look what I have for you. He had a little badge. They stick on the cases for the instruments, right? In this particular case, the brand name is King Trombones, made by Con Selmer. He said, I happen to know that your first trombone was a King trombone, and it was made right here. Wow, can you imagine? I'm 62 years old, and I'm in the place where they made an instrument that changed my life. You know what I told the people that work in the plant that day? You may not play the music, but you make the instruments that allow musicians to play the music. No one will ever know you, but the difference you make is changing the world. The world may never know you, but Rotary is changing the world. And thank you, and God bless you for doing exactly that. And by the way, one last thought before you clap. I want to very much thank you for inviting me to be here today. I'm going to hang around for a little minute afterwards if you want to ask some questions and come up and chat. But I just want to say a big, big Happy New Year. don't forget, the difference you make is worth the effort you put in to service before self. God bless you. Thanks for having me.